Okay. Live on Facebook.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Get going in a couple of minutes here. Webinar, fascinating webinar upcoming on releasing gazelles into the wild here in Israel. Hi, Miroslav in Belgrade. Please, people, feel free to say hello and let us know where you're from in the chat. And questions about the webinar, you can write in the questions and answer feature. Or if you write them in the chat, we'll try to get to all of them throughout the webinar. We'll answer them or after. But welcome everyone. Welcome Hillary in London. See, we're already at close to 50 participants and rising all over. Upstate New York, near Binghamton, Ottawa, South London. Welcome from everywhere. Always like to see the Berkshires. It's my neck of the woods where I grew up. Florida, Jerusalem, heard of that place. Hi, Amanda.
And we're live on Facebook as well.
Welcome, Facebook crowd. And everybody else coming in from Newton, Mass, of course. And Bournemouth, south coast of the UK. Hello, Rosalind.
Hi, Shoshana Fain-Silver.
Oh, Shoshana, great. Hello, hello. Charlottesville. Michael in Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. We'll get moving in a minute or two here. Respect the time of those who came, but give people another minute or two to sign up, get that Zoom muscle working. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm glad everybody's Zoom muscle is not tired out from this endless pandemic. Cape Cod, Rehovot, Micanopy, Florida, near University of Florida, animal biologist. Interesting. Lester in Johannesburg. Kibbutz Harel. Yeah, that's our own Barry. Barry, next time you can be a panelist. Arad. All right, I think maybe we'll just get going now. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jay Shofet, Director of Development and Partnerships for Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. I'm coming to you from my home in Tel Aviv. With us today, a fascinating couple of people who are doing just a fascinating job in their daily lives. Yael Hammerman-Solar and Omer Darel. I'll be introducing them in a second, but meanwhile, just welcoming you to this webinar. We're going to be talking about our project of releasing gazelles to the wild. We actually raise them in the heart of Jerusalem in a fascinating place called Gazelle Valley. We've done three webinars about that in the past. You may be familiar with it. It was an incredible struggle that we had against developers over a decade to keep this wild area of Jerusalem, right in the heart of Jerusalem, a wild land, but also an urban park. The gazelles breed there in a small urban core, and people enjoy the place free of charge, dawn to dusk. All kinds of communities in Jerusalem come out to Gazelle Valley Park and they watch the gazelles grow up there. And little by little, we've succeeded and are returning them to the wild. That's what we're going to talk about today. I'll just mention we have a couple upcoming webinars. This is something we do every couple of weeks. And we've been doing it since since April of the beginning of COVID in 2020. We have our own CEO, Iris Hahn, will be coming to us. I think it's a 3-week break actually, because of Hanukkah and Thanksgiving, but she'll be speaking on the 12th of December. That's rescheduled this Sunday, 3 weeks from today, December 12th, 8 p.m. in the evening. Iris Khan, our CEO at SPNI, was in Glasgow. She's coming back. She's back with perspectives on climate change globally and in Israel. And a week after that, you might have seen Alon Tal was scheduled. Chaver Knesset, member of Knesset and leading environmentalist Alon Tal. He'll be with us in January. And on the 19th of December, Dan Alon, our new Deputy CEO for Nature Protection, will be with us. So, and those will all be on the webinars. The webinars will all be listed on an email that you got today, 3 hours ago. And we send them out once a week or so with updates and reminders. So please keep posted. Welcome everybody. I'm not keeping up with the chat, but I see we're up to close to 100 people already on the Zoom, and I don't know, probably more on Facebook. So it's close to 5 after. I want to thank everybody for joining, for supporting us. I want to thank our hardworking board members who are here in North America, in the United States, Canada, the UK, France. Appreciate everybody's support and interest in our work. Hi from New Mexico and all the places that I missed. But, you know, write your questions and introduce yourselves. We'll get to know you, and we hope to see you next time and in the future. Meanwhile, I will introduce Yael Hemmerman-Solar. Yael is the director of Gazelle Valley Park in Jerusalem. Fascinating place. She's a former senior official of the environmental ministry in Israel, studied architecture, urban and regional planning. We are thrilled to have her with us today. She's also an expert on urban water systems, hydrology. I'm not exactly sure, but relates to what's going on in Gazelle Valley directly. So, so much interesting going on there. Thank you everybody for joining. And Yael, take it away.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm very happy and excited to be here today. I met you all in other webinars when I was walking with you in the park, while in two other times when some of us had to stay at home because of the corona. So today I'm here from my house in Ramat Raziel, and I'm very excited to talk to you about the Release Gazelle project that we've been trying to do for the last 2-3 years. And happy to say that in the last 3 months, we've succeeded to release 7 gazelles from Gazelle Valley Park to the Golan Heights. We have here with us the re-endorsing project manager Omer Darel, who is going to talk to you about this amazing project. Omer, tell us all about the project, and we'll have a half-an-hour presentation, and then we'll be happy to answer some questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Omer Darel. I'm talking to you from my apartment here in Jerusalem. So, yeah, everyone, are you seeing the presentation properly, the PowerPoint?
Yes,
yes.
Okay. We see it.
So I am, again, I'm Omer Darel. I'm the head of the reintroduction program here in Gazelle Valley. Outside of my work in the park, I'm a research student in the Hebrew University, and my main research interests are urban nature and conservation, which relates to our topic for today. Today I will tell you about the mountain gazelles of Israel, and how one community in Jerusalem united to protect their local urban nature site, and the gazelles reside in it. I will tell you about how this small population of gazelles, which was long considered doomed, was rehabilitated, stabilized, and has now become the foundation of a reintroduction program aiming to support other populations of this endangered species. This is the mountain gazelle, named in Hebrew Tzvi Israeli, the Israeli gazelle. The mountain gazelle are the only large herbivore that remained common throughout the entire non-arid parts of Israel, and has therefore become a symbol for Israeli wildlife. However, this species is facing a worldwide crisis. It is considered by the IUCN as an endangered species. with world population size comparable to species such as tigers or black rhinos. The most recent population estimate is 5,000 individuals, and almost all of them are in Israel. This animal significance does not stem solely out of its endangerment. Gazelles have been central to this land's culture for millennia, basically. From up here, you can see prehistoric rock carvings and Roman and Byzantine mosaics. It is also heavily featured in the Bible, the Jewish Bible. Hatzvi is usually a symbol of beauty and grace, like you can see in the romantic poetry of Shir HaShirim. דומה דודי לצבי או לעופר האיילי. My beloved resembles a gazelle. However, it was sometimes, the word tzvi sometimes used to describe certain attributes. For example, in the book of Ezekiel.
I have to stop you for a minute. We have, people are asking for you to speak a little bit more slowly.
Sorry, yeah, I have that problem. Okay, another example in the book of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, is a glory of all lands, tzvi hi lekol ha'aratzot, speaking about the land of Israel. And again in Shir HaShirim, God is resembles a crown of beauty, ateret tzvi. Okay. In modern Israeli culture, the gazelle is a symbol of grace and speed and the beauty of nature. It's celebrated by the Israeli Post Office and by war memorials such as the Hatzvi Israel Memorial next to the kibbutz Ma'aleh HaChamisha, and also by the SPNI. It's featured in our homepage. Although once common throughout the entire Levant, Israel remains the less significant stronghold for the mountain gazelles. To understand why, we need some historical background. Okay, this is a graph in which you can see the mountain gazelle population over the last century. The crisis began during World War I, during which both sides of the world provided thousands of firearms to different groups in the Mediterranean. And after the war ended, these firearms were aimed at the wildlife. Many animals, including the yachmur, fallow deer, bears, and cheetahs, which once roamed the land of Israel, went extinct during that era. However, about 500 gazelles managed to survive into the 1940s. The birth of the State of Israel in 1948 brought to the Middle East the first effective anti-poaching enforcement. And unlike populations of mountain gazelles in the rest of the Levant, the gazelles in Israel managed to survive the first half of the 20th century. Another crisis came in the form of a hoof and mouth disease outbreak in the 1980s, from which the population has been slowly recovering for several decades. However, now, the increasing number of people in Israel necessitates an upsurge of urban development. And once again, the gazelles of Israel are facing crisis. Now, the main threats to gazelle of Israel are poaching, illegal hunting, predation by feral dogs and jackals, and mainly habitat loss and fragmentation. The increase in the fragmentation of their habitat in Israel has shattered much of the population of the gazelles of Israel into small and isolated populations. As you can see, most of the populations in Jerusalem mountains are located in the red or dark red areas, which mark a low to very low connectivity. One of these populations lived in the midst of the city of Jerusalem. This is pre-Har Valley. It was once part of an ecological corridor passing through the city of Jerusalem. It was the major part of the habitat of a group of gazelles, which were free to roam into the valley and from it to the neighboring Jerusalem hills and mixed with adjacent populations. In the early 1990s, the construction of the Begin Highway trapped a herd of about 40 to 50 gazelles inside the valley, which was now part of an increasingly hostile urban environment. From this moment on, these gazelles were cornered, and during the 20 years following, the population fended into the brink of vanishing. The growing amounts of trash and discarded food in the city streets subsisted a dense population of jackals, you can see on the left, and feral dogs, both of which consistently chased dozens of gazelles into the highway, in which they were hit by cars and they usually died. Pre-Har Valley remained as the last major nature site in this part of Jerusalem, but in the late 90s, it was designated for further urban development. And both humans of the gazelles of the area were now facing the loss of their only available piece of nature.
Omer, please try to talk a little slower again.
I'm so sorry. Okay.
You were better and you sped up.
Okay, so it was that Pre-Har Valley was designated for further urban development. And both humans and gazelles of the area were now facing the loss of their only available piece of nature. And the gazelles seemed to be doomed. But the human neighbors would not give up. For almost 20 years, the citizens of Jerusalem fought to save the valley. They, along with the FPNI, renamed it Gazelle Valley, to mark that the struggle was also fought on the behalf of the wildlife. And eventually, the struggle of the people of the surrounding neighborhoods was what drove the decision to turn the place into a nature park, in which the gazelles will be protected. Gazelle Valley Park was made by the community and for the community. It is open, as Jay mentioned, all day, every day of the week for free. It also offers educational and cultural activities free of charge. And one of the main strengths of this park is its availability to members of the public who cannot usually access nature reservations and natural parks. Jerusalem has the highest poverty rate of all cities in Israel, and many of its inhabitants rely on public transportation. It does not usually allow them to get into remote nature reservations. Additionally, Orthodox and Hasidic Jews of Jerusalem cannot use any means of transportation during the weekend. And the Gazelle Valley being inside the city of Jerusalem and having no entrance fee provides necessary system services to these sectors and aims to educate and include them in conservation efforts, specifically regarding the mountain gazelle. Speaking of which, now that their habitat was secured, Gazelle Valley Park was tasked with rehabilitating its gazelle population. The first task was to protect the gazelles from predators and the highway, which killed so many of them. A full perimeter fence was dug 2 feet into the ground and protected the gazelles from predation. And the entire perimeter is being patrolled 2 times a day to ensure the fence was secure. But by the time the park was established, there were so few gazelles remaining that these protection just weren't enough. Every year in Israel, several fawns are stolen from the wild by poachers and raised for slaughter illegally. 10 gazelles who suffered this fate were confiscated by the Israeli Nature in the early 2000s by the Israeli Nature and Park Authority. So these gazelles, once rescued from the poachers, lost their ability to survive on their own in the wild. But the protected environment of Gazelle Valley Park provided them with a rare chance to live a normal life in which you will be free and safe. This small population boost enabled us to stabilize the population, which after 5 years of rehabilitation regained its former size of 50 gazelles. But what happened next would have been just unbelievable, just a couple of years early. As you can see, this is the plot of the population size growth since the formation of the park in 2015. Instead of just stabilizing, the population of gazelles just kept on growing. And in the spring of 2020, the population surpassed its original size, incredibly displaying exponential growth and going towards overpopulation. Now, I'd like to digress for a bit and talk to you about a concept in ecology called metapopulation. In a natural, well-connected environment, a population such as this in Gazelles Valley, with a high fertility would function as a source population, out of which animals would migrate and support populations that are not sustainable on their own. This process forms a net of small populations or subpopulations which support each other, called the metapopulation. As we discussed earlier, the severe habitat fragmentation in central Israel isolates the gazelles into these small populations, but they cannot support each other due to the fragmentation and roads separating them. When we consider how to avoid overpopulation, we were first pressured towards using standard procedures from zoos, such as sterilizing.
Can you please slow down again?
I'm so sorry, okay. When we first considered how to avoid overpopulation, we were pressured to use standard procedures from zoos, such as sterilizing. But eventually, all involved parties were convinced that we must not waste this opportunity provided by the high breeding success of the gazelles in the valley. Thus, the reintroduction program was born. Using mathematical modeling based on the breeding patterns observed in the park, we estimated that our population can provide up to 25 gazelles per year and remain stable. Okay, so all we had to do is to catch 20 to 25 gazelles per year and release them into the wild. Well, it was actually not that simple. Catching the gazelles is the most complicated task we faced so far. Mountain gazelles can run at a speed of up to 45 miles per hour. A grown male can leap over 6.5 feet high obstacles and can spot a potential predator from miles away, which makes capturing them very problematic. During the dry season, gazelles are searching for water and green vegetation, and our plan was to lure them into a pen by watering it, providing the gazelles plenty of green grass to eat. We also scattered around some gazelle sticks, like apples, which seem to do the job. Okay. It's, sorry, it's supposed to be a video. Okay. As you can see, this is me and my partner Efrat. And once the gazelle enters the enclosure, Avishai, which also works with us on the gazelle introduction, will close the gate. And after the gazelle is safely closed inside, the veterinarian can administer sedatives using a dart. Okay, so the main issue we faced after we managed to get the gazelles to enter into the pen was their determination to get out. And now watch closely. You see that? That's the gazelle's tail. This grown male actually jumped over a 7 feet high wall. So we had to extend the height of all of the fence to 8 feet, which also wasn't enough because some males managed to jump over that. Now, another problem with the pens was a condition called capture myopathy. It's very common when trying to relocate and sedate large mammals. And it's basically a very acute stress response that in the worst cases can kill the animal. And the process of capturing the gazelle in the pen was very stressful for them. So we are now experimenting with darting them out in the open. The main difficulty with this method is that once we dart the animal, it will usually run away, and we risk not being able to find it after it falls asleep.
Oh, no, please slow down again. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. So I will repeat. So we are now experimenting with darting them out in the open. The main difficulty with this method is that once we dart the animal, it will usually run away, and we risk not being able to find it after it falls asleep. So we had to harness some advanced technological solutions. We first tried using drones. As you can see in the video, during one of our capture attempts, this is a bunch of the gazelles who, when we attempted to shoot an arrow at one of them, immediately scattered, avoiding the arrows and running away. And we also have to examine some more advanced solutions in the future. Now, assuming the gazelle was successfully sedated and located, we will proceed to transport it to its destination site in the Golan Heights and wake it up with the antidote. And now you'll see one of the head veterinarian of the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority, Ronnie King, and he will administer the antidote, and you'll see how the male gazelle wakes up. Do you see that? This is Avishai, my partner. Okay, but our job does not end there. When we release an animal into the wild, we must choose between two options. The default is hard release, straight into the wild. The animal can be released anywhere, and there is no infrastructure needed in the destination site. However, the Golan Heights, unlike Gazelle Valley, is a host to dangerous predators, such as the local wolf subspecies you see here. And a disoriented gazelle who is still recovering from sedation and a long car ride inside the crate has a much lower chance of surviving its first night in the wild. So what we used is a called soft release. We release the animal into a pen in the destination site, usually a very large one, in which it will acclimate for several days. And when it's fully recovered from the journey, we will release it into the wild. Okay, so now it's the highlight of the presentation. This is the best released video we issued so far. Oh, there it goes. Now, this athletic young male was captured just a week ago in the park. Some of you may notice the green ear tag, which is one of the methods we use to monitor the gazelles after they're released and check how well the reintroduction is going along. Now, what you see here is the acclimation pen in the Gamla reservation in the Golan Heights. All of our gazelles so far were introduced there, mainly because this is the only available facility so far to host the gazelle for a couple of days safely and has a staff monitoring it. Now here by the equator, you see two of the girls doing their national service in the Gazelle Valley Park. Now the first two national service people who tagged along to our release and are visibly, though in a slow motion, excited. This is very much the highlight of our efforts. Okay, so we covered the mountain gazelles and their significance and their endangerment and how Gazelle Valley Park came to be and how we got to a point where we're reintroducing gazelles into the wild. As Yael mentioned, so far we managed to release 7 gazelles into the wild, and now I will tell you about our plans for the future of this project. Perfecting the capture process, establishing multiple release destinations, creating a long-term monitoring program, and reintroducing over 200 gazelles by 2032. Okay, now every single relocation attempt is an expensive and difficult operation, and it requires the joint effort of specially trained staff and a veterinarian qualified to safely work with a very sensitive wild animal. We plan on focusing further efforts of capturing gazelles outside of the pens in order to reduce the stress experienced by the animals as much as we possibly can. This method, however, requires some advanced technological tools, including drones, radio transmitting darts, and the use of advanced software to allow the drone to track and locate the sedated gazelles in the shortest time possible. Another avenue we examining is developing a mechanism that will allow the veterinarian to shoot the sedative dart directly from the drone. Okay, establishing multiple release destinations. So far, all of the gazelles were reintroduced in the Golan Heights. However, to have a real conservation value, we must support the small and fragmented populations in the central Israel. To maximize the gazelle's chances of survival, we will need to set up multiple soft release pens in several destination sites. Okay, now to create a long-term monitoring program, we have to equip gazelles with a GPS transmitter. Now, the biggest impact this operation can have is to set a precedent and form a method of sustaining fragmented populations of large animals such as these. And to do that, we need this ability to monitor the survival and the reintroduction of the gazelles and quantify their contribution to the sustainability of the recipient population. So far, we are only able to equip 4 of our gazelles with transmitters, which limits somewhat our ability to estimate the success of this operation and its viability for solution for fragmented populations. And now in the next 10 years, we aim for this program to make a substantial difference, stabilizing the most vulnerable populations of gazelles in the urbanizing Israel. And the natural areas within the urban environment are generally regarded by the scientific community as low quality and of minor ecological value. This experimental program, if successful, can redefine the way communities and urban nature factor into conservation. This project, however, is just one part of our larger mission of connecting the local communities with the conservation of nature surrounding them. This project already attracted the attention of Israeli media, which allowed us to continue in raising awareness to the plight of the mountain gazelles, preparing the ground for the required policy changes which are necessary to save this species and conserve Israeli nature. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Omer. Yael.
Thank you, Omer. So this is a very exciting moment for all of us. We've been waiting for this moment, I think 4 years since we saw that we're actually managing to enlarge the amount of gazelles inside the park. In the beginning, we were not even sure that we can grow above 11 gazelles that were brought to us from imprinted gazelles from outside the valley. So it's very, very exciting. It's the first time a project like this is done in Israel. As you heard from Omer, it was very difficult, and we had a lot of, we tried in many ways and for a few years, and this year we've managed to succeed, to get, to understand how it could work and how it could be a success of releasing gazelles. There was one question about the ear tags. So the ear tags don't have GPS, but they can allow us to watch the gazelles from the distance and to identify the gazelles that were brought from Gazelle Valley Park. I didn't see if there were other questions. Jay, did you notice?
Yes, if we're already going into questions, Yael, we have a lot of time left on this webinar. Omer, you could have slowed down quite a bit on
Omer was very excited.
Presentation. Yes, it was exciting. It is exciting. Let me look. Peter Dratch, who's with us today. Peter is from his LinkedIn, he's an endangered species program manager and a senior biologist at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And Peter has a couple questions. One of them in the chat is, Omer, with these extreme population bottlenecks, are you monitoring genetic loss through drift and inbreeding? And I believe his related question in the questions and answers, let me just get to that, because I think it's, oh, it's here. Avi has closed it here. Yes, how are we genetically monitoring the populations given their relatively small size?
Yeah, this is a major problem for gazelles all throughout Israel. As I showed you in the graph, the entire population went through a severe bottleneck about 70 years ago. And there's several things that the nature and the Parks Authority does in the grander scale, and including one research that came and that went out mapping the genetic difference between populations. And regarding specifically inbreeding depression, our main way of dealing with that is reintroducing into the Gazelle Valley fresh blood. Additional individuals once every couple of years, just a standard procedure in a captive population or an isolated population. We do not monitor directly in genetic state within the Gazelle Valley during this point. It's definitely something we plan to do in the future. In the grander scale, it's a difficult thing to manage when we were facing many of the small populations. And so far, the policy in Israel was to monitor them closely and see if there are any visible signs of inbreeding depression, which is maybe a bit questionable way of dealing with this situation. But this is very much one of the problems we want to address with this program. Our gazelles, the 8 individuals and it was part of the population that started up this current population we have in the valley. Came from several points in Israel, some very diverse group of gazelle that were reintroduced into the park. And we estimated the heterozygosity in the gazelles in the park to be relatively high. However, as you can probably gather by yourself, this is not an issue that was fully addressed so far. It's definitely one of our plans for the future, both in our population and in target populations. I hope I answered it.
Okay, I think you answered that well. Peter, you can be in touch with us afterwards or throughout. And I understand you're in Colorado. You know, maybe we'll get out there someday in one of the trips to the States. You already answered the question, Yael. The modern Hebrew word for gazelle, it is in fact the same as the biblical word. Not all animals mentioned in the Bible do we call by the same names today, I understand, but the gazelle, the Tzvi Israeli or Tzvi Eretz Israeli is the same one the Bible refers to. Yes, and Omer, that was a great slide about the iconic depictions of the gazelle from when? When were the earliest wall paintings, cave paintings?
Those rock carvings are actually disputed. The earliest estimations for their age is prehistoric, over 10,000 years, but there are some experts that insist they are relatively new, even several hundred years old, just done by a Bedouin herdsman.
Oh, so, really? Interesting.
It's a very hard thing to date, a rock carving, because it's not inside the cave. It's a rock carving done on a rock in the open surface of Mount Negev.
Very interesting. Okay, moving on. We have a bunch of questions here. Yael, does our organization provide food for the gazelles in the park? I mean,
okay, so we don't provide food for gazelles in the park. They eat from nature, from what grows in the park. The whole ecological system is managed in a way that nature, what nature brings is enough for the gazelles. And it means that the ecological system is actually working. We do it on purpose. We don't want to make the gazelles get close or to adjust to the fact that they're near people, human beings, because we would like to have the possibility to go on and release them to nature and have them survive while they leave the park. So we try to make it as natural as possible.
Right. So in other words, the answer is yes, we feed the gazelles in the sense that the vegetation that we plant and the water systems that we manage provide nourishment for the gazelles, as they do for migrating birds and other animals who live in the park. And by the way, as we do at all our birding sites, where, for example, a kilometer away at the Jerusalem Bird Observatory, the Neely and David Jerusalem Bird Observatory, we've planted trees and vegetation and water plants specifically to attract and nourish migrating and resident birds, as well as other animals.
I would like to add something to the lecture, that the problem of gazelles in Israel is not solved by this park being a place that could produce gazelles to nature. They still have a lot of obstacles when they leave the park and go to the open areas, because the open areas are still endangered in ways of planning and infrastructure, and jackals and human beings behaving in the wrong way to nature. So we still have a long way to go. It's just part of what we do in SPNI in order to save the Israeli gazelle. So it's very important to say that here when we're sitting in a webinar of SPNI.
Thank you, Yael. And I would go one step further than that. It's the very fact of having the Gazelle Valley Park in the center of Jerusalem and accessible to Jerusalemites on foot and open dawn to dusk 7 days a week, attracting, human mammals from all the populations of Jerusalem. That is not just to provide, it's hugely important to provide a place to relax in nature and take your family and enjoy and, you know, be sustainable that way. But it's also because only, you know, when you learn to love nature, do you learn to protect it. And so we create activists, you know, maybe out of every 100 people that visit, it's going to change the life of 10 of them. And one of them will become the next Yael or Omer and, you know, devote their lives to preserving the gazelles and rewilding Israel. So, you know, it's the human nature interaction that's also crucially important in this whole project. Miroslav in Belgrade asks about the genetic inbreeding again. I think you pretty much answered that. How do we deal with fragmentation? Do we ever use the fragmentation of genetic populations? I think you addressed that, Omer. Do we ever use artificial insemination to mix genetics?
It's not common practice in wildlife.
It's not. Okay, it makes sense. Do gazelles have a language? This is an interesting question from Joella. Do gazelles have a language for communicating with one another? Are they not attached to a specific territory or a herd or tribe? That is, can you change location of an individual with no emotional effect on the animal?
That's a great question. Well, yeah. Obviously there is some emotional effect. Now, regarding the way gazelles communicate, there are several modes of communication. The main one is actually more of a body language sort of communication. You see it mainly in aggressive states between males, but also between a female and a fawn. And you will see sort of the way they approach each other, the way they move their head, and the way they present themselves is a main way of communication, but they also have a vocal communication from several varieties. And there are warning sounds. Try to imitate them, it sounds a bit like something like that. It's a bit of a small high-pitched bark, very funny to hear that. And there are also sounds that fawns and their mothers used to communicate with each other, which is sort of sounds like a bit like a small sheep. And now regarding their social structure, and it's actually quite complicated. Females and their young fawn are usually in a herd, a standard herd, but the males are in a separate social system. And there will many times be a territorial male that will defend the territory in which, usually the territory in which he will coexist with a herd of females and fawns, and he will keep out other males and will also banish male fawns when they reach a certain age. But weaker males can also be part of a young male herd, or a bachelor herd, we nickname it sometimes. And what we do when we relocate the gazelles is, yes, by the nature of things, separate them from their existing social infrastructure. And it's a sacrifice we have to make. The gazelle has to make, not necessarily voluntarily, but when we do that, we both ensure the future of these specific gazelles, which will not have to be closed in an increasingly dense population in the Gazelle Valley. And we also provide them with opportunity to experience vaster, more interesting, both social groups and territory. But yeah, obviously there is an emotional impact of gazelles, which are related, even traumatic impact sometimes. It's something we have to factor into account in every operation we do with sensitive wild animals, such as these.
Fascinating. Murray Title in Toronto wants to know how many gazelles died in the Jerusalem Hills forest fire. I guess he means the last one this past summer, and include the juveniles who died as a result of being orphaned. Do we know that number?
It's a very hard number to estimate it. I don't know the exact number, but gazelles are mainly harmed by the loss of their habitat from forest fires. Unless it's a very young fawn, they do not get caught up in the fire. They're very fast and they can run from it very effectively. Once they run, they face dangers such as running into traffic and of course losing their habitat and then adjusting to a new territory, which is always difficult. But because of those attributes of the gazelles, it's very hard to quantify the damage done specifically to them by the forest fire. But most of other animals, smaller animals who are caught in the forest fire will die instantly.
Mm-hmm. And the juveniles, were there juveniles at the time of the fire? Can they outrun the fire?
So the fire was in the late summer, early fall, which is not typically a season. There are a lot of juveniles around. Most gazelles in the wild are born in between the months of February and May. There may have been some, like in Gazelle Valley, because there are plenty of resources for the gazelles, there are a lot of food. They breed all throughout the year, but still the majority of the breeding of the fawns are born during the spring. So not a lot of juveniles, but probably some.
Okay.
But
thanks.
again, I have to add, being a regional planner, I have to add the fact of the ecological corridors being blocked by development and by planning and by infrastructure is a main issue for the gazelles when they have to run away from one habitat because there is a fire or some other danger, and they don't have another habitat to run to because they face development or a new village or a road. This is part of the problem. When we block the ecological corridors, it's why we have this species so endangered in Israel. The development is so fast, and we have to keep those ecological corridors open as much as possible. I want to take these last minutes to thank the people who contribute so generously to this project, and we've managed to succeed in this way for the last 2 years, working on it very, very hard. Releasing one gazelle to the wild is about $2,000 US. This is something we've understood just after 2 years working on this project. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to say thank you to the people who contribute.
Thank you, Yael. But it's not yet the last minutes. We still got 15 minutes on the clock and a lot of questions to answer. So,
we're still here.
So let's move. But yes, your point is well taken. That this is an expensive proposition, and all support is very welcome, and we appreciate it very much. You can donate online and specify that you want to dedicate it to the Gazelle Project, or contact our offices in Toronto or New York, and be in touch that way, or be in touch directly through the mails that I send. But let's move on, because we got a bunch of more questions, and I guess we'll try to get them. We'll get them quick. Miroslav in Belgrade is still interested in the whole genetic issue, and he wonders, can we send the gazelles, export them to other countries? And I guess the opposite of that is, can we import gazelles to keep the breeding better? Is that a thing that happens?
So the only other populations of gazelle, of this species of gazelle outside of Israel, is in Turkey. There's a population of 300 to 500 gazelles in the mountains of southern Turkey.
I understand some of them are probably in jail in Turkey. Is that not true? Just a bad joke. Sorry. Because we have to get them released. Yeah, well, they are not well researched, and we're actually not even that sure that this is the same species. It's still left to be seen. So if anything, the main thing we may be able to do in the future is to export this species to countries from which it went extinct. It's a bit problematic politically, but not as it used to be. And once we establish the procedure, working procedure in which we can export gazelles on a regular basis inside of Israel, this is definitely a very promising possibility. Interesting.
And I would very much like for us to see that day.
Well, actually, Miroslav wrote that he read on Wikipedia that there are these gazelles also in Turkey, but we might be raising money to send you to the mountains of Turkey to actually figure out if they're genetically the same species or not. We'll keep you posted. Total number of gazelle population in Israel, did you give a number, guys?
It's about 5,000. Every year, every year the Nature and Park Authority does a head count of the major populations. And very, very difficult thing to do. These are very elusive animals. The gazelles of the valley are much more well acquainted with people than other gazelles. So we have a much easier time counting them, but gazelles in the wild can run from a kilometer across, and it's very difficult to count them. So it's a minimum number of 4,000, and the actual estimate is about 5,000 mature individuals.
Okay. Listen, Murray is confused, and I have to admit it is confusing. He said the sign says Ganat Tzvaim, but wouldn't that mean that the singular of that would be Tzav? And doesn't that mean turtle?
We actually have many tortoises in the valley.
We do have turtles, yes. We have a whole turtle rescue.
We had a webinar about tortoises.
We did. We had a turtle rescue center there.
Right.
Hebrew is a bit tricky like that. And the singular is Tzvi, the plural is Tzvaim. There's not much sense to it.
And the plural of Tzav is?
Tzabim.
Tzav is a tortoise, and the plural for Tzav is Tzabim.
Tzabim, okay.
It's without an aleph.
Right, right. Okay, Dan Pava, our board member in Santa Fe that Dan Alone and I just visited. Hello, Dan Pava. He asked, could you, and this is very important, and we haven't talked enough about, I brought up the human gazelle interaction in the park. Can you have an estimate, Yael, about the number of visitors to Gazelle Valley Park as compared to other Jerusalem attractions? And what percentage of visitors are local Israeli or local in Jerusalem compared with people from around the country or around the world?
So definitely I can talk about that. We have between 170,000 to 200,000 visitors a year in the park. Just to give you the numbers, the number of the biggest park, which is the Gan Hayot Tanachi, the Tanachi Zoo, which is considered to be the most popular place, outdoor place to visit, is 750,000 visitors a year. We're not a zoo, so we have a lot of people visiting Gazelle Valley. We know that in the Corona, we've raised the numbers in about 34 to 40% more people visited because it was open all through the Corona, except for the first 3 weeks. The Gazelle Valley was always open. It was considered to be a safe place inside the 100 meters, then inside the 500 meters, and then in the 1 kilometer that people could go. And then for running or cycling, when this opened, it became a very, very popular place. It also became a place where schools could come and study. So when classrooms were closed, teachers met their students in the Gazelle Valley. We had about 30 to 40 classes studying in the Gazelle Valley, regular classes. And now we've begun this year, we've begun a pilot with 25 classrooms coming each week for 1 day, outdoor studying in the Gazelle Valley. So we have a lot of students coming to the Gazelle Valley, working with us on materials, not only about ecology, also about civil awareness, about historical issues, about biblical issues. A lot of other subjects are studied in the Gazelle Valley, all related to how we can actually study outdoor. So this became a very important place for Jerusalem people and from people coming from outside of Jerusalem. Another fact that is very important to say, that people that visit the Gazelle Valley are not like the ones sitting in this webinar or people that have the money to buy a ticket to go to one of the parks that you have to pay 100 or 150 shekels per family to visit, like in one of the national parks, because it's free. Everything is free of charge. When in all of the vacations, in holidays, in Muslim holidays and Hebrew holidays, we have free guides walking around explaining about the habitats, explaining about nature preservation, explaining about climate change, and everything is free for the public. So what we have is people that are not used to get this kind of education, that are not raised on being green, getting those aspects every time they visit the park. So I think it's a very, very important concept to mainstream what we're talking about in the SPNI, what we're talking about in Glasgow. And this is a way to get to the public that doesn't always get the chance to visit places like that.
Thank you, Yael. And how big is the park?
The park is 220 dunams.
220 dunams, so that's 50
acres, yes.
Some 50 plus acres. Okay.
And we're enlarging it now, actually. A new project we're doing with the municipality is adding 50 more dunams to the northern part of the park.
Okay, let's try to answer quickly telegraphically. Any plans for land bridges over Begin or in general in Israel to help the gazelles move over ecological corridors?
I'm sorry to say, still we don't have any plans, but it is our biggest dream to open this ecological barrier. I hope one day we'll get to do a webinar about that.
Okay.
Now, I'll show you a slide for a bit. As you can see, this is how the area looks now. And to bridge the gap between Gazelle Valley and the Jerusalem Hills will require a project like which was never seen, particularly not in Israel.
Okay, that's not going to happen. Let's move on. But you know, hopefully there are land bridges over Road 6 and over Road 1 to Tel Aviv. So there's been some movement on that. Other questions here. I've lost my questions. Omer, you talked a little bit about the challenges they face once they're released, you know, being run over. And are there natural predators, by the way, somebody asks?
Inside the valley?
Yeah, no, no, not inside the valley, in nature, when they're released. What are their natural predators?
So many of the large predators.
Quickly, natural predators.
Yeah.
Jackals, wild dogs, people.
In
the Golan Heights, wolves, and sometimes hyenas.
Boars? Yeah, okay. You think they could outrun those things. Do we know how the 7 are doing that were released? Are we monitoring those exact 7? We saw
them in nature, thanks to the tags in the ear tags. So yes, they're doing quite well.
Okay, cool. Omer, quick summary of their life cycles. How long do they live? How often are the young born? How many young per litter? And what's the age of maturity?
Okay, usually 1 young or maximum 2 youngs per litter. Twins are relatively rare. And males reach maturity at the age of 1.5 years. Females can reach maturity at the age of 7 months. The lifespan in nature is usually 8 years. However, in captivity, they can reach to 12 years.
Cool. And a female will give birth how often?
Usually once a year, but in Gazelle Valley, sometimes twice a year because of their...
Thanks. Is this a national park or local? And what would be the difference? Yeah.
It's a local park. It's actually a city park. If people know Jerusalem, it's a lot like Gan Saker Park, which is the largest city park. But the difference is it has nature and gazelles inside of it.
Mm-hmm. And a national park would be, that's run by the Nature and Parks Authority, falls under a different, but is run, you know, similarly though, I would say.
But you have to pay to enter.
You have to pay. for most of it, right?
But here, no, yeah, here it's
right. New and improved corridors, we're trying to do, we just mentioned that. Are there control over the number of people who can be at the park at one time? Good question.
We had over 5,000 visitors a day, and it was great. So
in other words, it wasn't crowded. It wasn't
crowded. The gazelles know where to go when it's too crowded for them. There is the natural core that the gazelles can run off when they feel that the park is too crowded, and the people stay in the other 2/3 of the park, which are not the natural core.
Interesting. Okay.
Jay, there's one more.
Sure.
What happens when the animals go out of the park? Not sure if they mean if they escape the park or if they are released. So in either way.
Yeah, I mean, Omer talked about that briefly. I think I took it to mean the released animals, and they face all the dangers that he mentioned. But Omer, you go ahead and, you know,
if you're talking about the released animals, so we choose like very carefully the areas they release to. But yeah, mainly the initial disorientation that makes them vulnerable to predators and other dangers. Escape from the park is not something that happened during its existence.
Okay.
So I saw one important question. The park is open 7 days a week. It keeps Shabbat for the religious people. We have a lot of religious people coming after Bet Knesset on Saturdays, enjoying the park. And the only day it's closed in the year, it's Yom Kippur.
Okay.
Every other day it's open.
Listen,
from 6:30 a.m. to sunset.
So we're going to wind up in a minute or two. I'll make another comment here. Dan Pava mentions, and I'm mentioning this to you, Yael and Omer, that, and you know, I know you believe this as well. If this can be done in Jerusalem, then think how it can be replicated in cities around the world as part of, you know, urban greening of these areas. And he says this is an example that should be mentioned in Paul Hawkins' regeneration website. I'm not familiar with that, but we will check that out. And Dan, keep us posted on that. Everybody's thanking you. Fascinating website, wonderful talk. Kol hakavod. Some people even said that they heard you very well, Omer. Really, thank you both very much. Avi, are we missing any major questions here?
No, we've covered all of them.
Okay, great. Well, thank everybody. I really want to thank you all for joining. Over 110, 20 people here at the Peak, and more on Facebook. Appreciate very much everybody's participation, your interest in our work, your support of our work. Omer and Yael are off tomorrow morning to do what they do, returning the gazelles to the wild and raising them in this incredible nature reserve in the heart of Jerusalem. We highly recommend, we highly encourage everybody to come see it if you're visiting Israel. Hopefully 2022 will be the year when there'll be full entry into Israel for people from abroad. And really the Gazelle Valley should be one of your first stops. So please, and be in touch with us. You can show up anytime, dawn to dusk, but it would be even better if you let us know you're coming. We'll make sure that somebody is there to meet and greet and, you know, hear what you have to say about it. So thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it. And we will be here again in 3 weeks with Iris Hahn, our CEO, talking about Glasgow, climate change and beyond in Israel and in the world. So thank you very much. The Gazelles, thank you. Omer, Yael. Avi, thanks so much, back office there. And we will see you very soon. Signing off from Tel Aviv, Ramat Raziel, and Omer, where are you?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, the holy city, home of the Gazelle Valley. Bye-bye. Thanks, Avi.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.